Welcome to exclusive Touching Podcast. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The village of Yumuwife had never seen a car like the one that rolled in that Friday morning. A sleek black Mercedes with tinted windows and silver rims that caught the sunlight like polished diamonds. Children chased it barefoot while traders paused to stare, mouths half open in disbelief. But inside that car sat Chike Nwankwo, the only son of a wealthy Lagos-based businessman, Chief Nwankwo. He was in his early 20s, tall, fair-skinned, with a carefully groomed beard and gold chain that glinted against his white linen shirt. The air around him reeked of entitlement. Yet, when he stepped out and met Amaka Okiri at the community borehole, a girl with rough cornrows, dark skin, and quiet eyes that held a mix of sadness and curiosity, something shifted in him. She wasn't like the other girls in the village. She didn't stare at him like a god. She only greeted him with a soft "good afternoon, sir," and returned to her yellow jerrycan. Chike was drawn to her innocence. Day after day, he returned to the borehole, pretending to fetch water with his cousin just to see her. She didn't know how wealthy he was. She didn't care. He loved that. One day, he offered to carry her jerrycan and walk her home, and although her legs trembled, she allowed him. That was the beginning. Under the mango tree, behind her father's crumbling mud house, they would talk about life. Hers filled with unpaid WEC results and a dying mother. His with flashy parties and a father who never listened. He told her she was the kind of girl who should be in the city, that he would take her there. Amaka had never felt special before. She had never worn lipstick or held a phone that cost more than $2,000. But with Chike, she felt seen, wanted, valuable, and like every young girl raised on silent sacrifices and overripe dreams, she believed him. Every word. By the third week, he gave her a small phone and started sneaking her $10,000 in brown envelopes. He said it was nothing, that he wanted her to feel loved. Amaka didn't take much of it. She was raised by a proud father who sold firewood and a dying mother who prayed more than she spoke. But one evening, after returning from the market, she found Chike waiting in front of her house with a bouquet of artificial roses. He knelt on one knee, a scene loud enough to attract half the compound, and told her he would marry her one day. Her heart fluttered. In that moment, she forgot who she was and remembered only who she could become, Mrs. Amaka Nwankwo. That night, she stared at the ceiling as the harmattan wind whistled through the cracked zinc. Her cheeks burned. Not from shame, but from something she had never felt before, hope. Their love bloomed in stolen moments. Under the mango tree behind the health center, by the river where children bathed, Chike and Amaka built a world of whispered promises and sugar-coated lies. He brought her perfume, soft bread from the city, and one day, a blue and white gown she only wore on Sundays. He called her my light and told her how he wanted her to meet his mother in Lagos soon. Amaka, who had never been to a mall or worn heels, started to believe that love could truly lift her out of poverty. And she gave him all of her heart, trust, and eventually her body, though she was hesitant. Chike was the first man to tell her she was beautiful without makeup, and when he touched her, it felt like more than desire. It felt like belonging. He told her, "No one will ever hurt you while I'm alive." She believed it, fully, foolishly. But behind Chike's soft voice and boyish charm was a prideful man battling his father's shadow. In Lagos, he was nothing but an errand boy for his father's real estate empire, constantly reminded that he would never be good enough. So, when he returned to the village and found Amaka, a girl who admired him without expectations, he felt powerful. In her eyes, he wasn't just Chief Nwankwo's son, he was a man. But that power was fragile. The moment Amaka mentioned meeting his family formally, he panicked. Still, he pretended. He promised to bring his father for the bride price meeting, and even gave her mother some money for preparations. Amaka's father, skeptical but desperate to see his daughter married before her mother died, reluctantly agreed. It was the only flicker of joy their home had seen in months. The bride price day came. Amaka wore her best wrapper and borrowed earrings. Neighbors gathered. Songs were rehearsed. But when Chief Nwankwo arrived with his entourage, everything shattered. He looked around at the small compound, the cracked walls, the lack of a carport, and scoffed. He didn't sit down. He pointed at Amaka's father and asked, "So this is the girl my son wants to marry? A common firewood seller's daughter." He called the family greedy, accused them of trapping his son. Amaka stood frozen as Chaik remained silent, staring at the ground. Her father's face tightened, her mother clutched her chest, and the women preparing the jollof rice stopped stirring. In less than 20 minutes, the Nwankwo convoy left in anger. Chaik didn't defend her. He didn't fight. That night, Amaka cried until her lips bled from the dryness of her weeping. In the days that followed, Chaik grew cold. His calls reduced. The long text messages became one-word replies. Amaka, confused and desperate, tried to remain calm. She reminded him of their moments, of the love he swore would never fade, but his silence was louder than any insult. One day, she walked barefoot to the local park where he was waiting for his return ride to Lagos. She asked him if he still planned to marry her, still believed in them. He looked at her, eyes empty, and said, "You're not my class, Amaka." My father was right. It felt like a blade slid across her chest. He continued, "I'm from a family of legacy. Your people are trying to milk me. You're lucky I even looked your way." And just like that, the same boy who once promised her forever discarded her like trash. Her knees buckled, but she remained standing. She had to. Amaka walked home like a ghost. She didn't eat that night. Her mother's sickness worsened, and her father became colder. Weeks passed, and the signs began. Missed periods, nausea, dizziness. The test confirmed it. She was pregnant. At first, she considered hiding it, but when her mother noticed her skipping meals and looking pale, she confessed. Her father was furious. "You've brought disgrace to this house," he shouted, raising his cane. Her mother cried until she collapsed. The entire compound gossiped. She used pregnancy to trap a rich boy, they whispered. She tried to reach Chaik, but his line was switched off. When she sent a message that read, "I'm carrying your child," he responded simply, "It's not mine. You can't trap me." The final blow came when Chaik returned to the village 3 months later, not to see Amaka, but to propose to another girl, Adora, the daughter of a commissioner. It was a public affair. There were canopies, a DJ, and photographs. Amaka stood behind a tree, stomach already showing, watching the man who once kissed her forehead now kneeling before another. She wanted to scream, to tear her skin, to wake up from this nightmare. But she didn't. She walked away quietly. That night, her father told her to leave his house. He didn't want to die of shame. Her mother, too weak to protest, only looked at her with eyes that said, "Forgive me." And that was how Amaka, 3 months pregnant and broken, walked into the dark, barefoot and alone, without a bag, without a home, and with nothing but a beating heart and the life growing inside her. The morning Amaka confirmed she was pregnant, the sun was already high, but she felt nothing but cold. She sat on the broken bench behind Mama F's chemist, her trembling fingers holding the cheap test strip that now bore 2 red lines. Her stomach twisted, not just from nausea, but from the weight of what this meant. She had no money, no shelter, no support system. The wind carried voices from the market square, traders haggling, children laughing, motorbikes sputtering. But it all sounded like static. She tried to breathe, but each breath felt like swallowing thorns. For a few minutes, she imagined the past. Chaik's voice calling her my queen, his hand in hers. The day he gifted her the sky blue slippers she wore only to church. Then she remembered the way he had looked through her, not at her, when he told her she wasn't his class. That was the memory that stayed. That was the memory that broke her. She walked home slowly, unsure of whether to share the news or disappear. Her father, already bitter from the bride-price disgrace, had grown distant. Her mother was barely holding on. The illness had spread to her lungs, and the hospital had stopped giving her medication without payment. Amaka had become the caretaker, the one who fetched water, cooked, and begged for alms to buy paracetamol. Now this? She imagined her father's face when he found out. She imagined the slaps, the curses, the shame. Her hand instinctively touched her stomach, and for the first time, She acknowledged the tiny life forming inside. It terrified her. But somewhere deep beneath the terror was something faint and stubborn, a spark of protectiveness. She thought, "You didn't ask to be here. You don't deserve to suffer for what he did to me." That thought made her eyes blur with tears, but she didn't cry. She simply sat outside the hut until sunset, staring at nothing. That night, when she told her parents, the world exploded. Her father's voice roared like thunder, accusing her of being a disgrace, a shame to the family name. Her mother collapsed again, clutching her chest, whispering, "Why, Amaka? Why?" There were no explanations strong enough, no apologies deep enough. She took the slaps, the kicks, the insults. Her father accused her of trying to ruin their family forever, of being worse than her dead aunt who'd once eloped with a married man. Then, without warning, he threw her bag outside and screamed, "You will not kill me before my time. Leave this house. I don't care where you go. Die if you want." She packed what little she had, a wrapper, an old rubber slipper, the pregnancy test, and walked into the night. It wasn't just the rejection that shattered her. It was the way the man who once called her daddy's girl couldn't even look at her as she left. She didn't go far that first night. With nowhere to sleep and no one to call, Amaka curled up on the back steps of the village health center, her head resting on her folded wrapper, her stomach cramping from fear and hunger. The stars were cold, and the night was too loud, dogs barking, owls hooting, rats scuttling nearby. She shivered and clutched her belly, whispering to the unborn child, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Morning came with sun, but no mercy. Her face was swollen, her lips dry, and the baby inside her reminded her with every kick that she had no choice but to survive. She wandered toward the market square in search of food, hoping someone would offer her a small job or at least a piece of bread. But it was there, in front of a crowd of traders and passers-by, that Chaik struck the final blow. He was standing near his car, surrounded by two flashy friends and a laughing woman with long lashes and loud jewelry, his new fiancée, Adora. Amaka saw them from afar and turned to leave, but he had already seen her. He called out her name, not with affection, but with mockery. So you still day Waka for road? No husband? No home?" His friends laughed. Adora rolled her eyes. Then, without warning, Chaik stepped forward, pointing at her belly and shouting, "She's going around telling people I got her pregnant." "Me? As if I would touch a thing like that. You want to use pregnancy to tie me down? Lie." The market froze. All eyes turned to Amaka. Some laughed. Others whispered. One woman even spat and said, "These girls of today, always looking for soft life." Amaka didn't speak. She couldn't. She just stood there, watching the man she loved reduce her to shame in the place she once bought pepper and tomatoes. The mockery didn't end there. Chaik brought out 200 from his pocket, flung it at her feet, and said, "Use this and buy sense. Don't call my name again, or I'll have you arrested for defamation." His friends cheered. Adora smirked. The notes floated in the dusty wind like pieces of her dignity. Amaka didn't pick them up. She didn't cry. She turned slowly and walked away, not just from the market, but from the last piece of herself that still believed in kindness. From that moment on, something in her hardened. The girl who once laughed under mango trees and dreamed of city life was gone. In her place was a woman, a broken one, carrying a baby and the memory of humiliation that would haunt her forever. Days blurred into nights. Amaka wandered from street to street, sleeping behind shops, sometimes under mango trees, begging for leftover akra or gari to keep her strength up. She learned how to shield her stomach when people passed, so they wouldn't target her as another hungry girl with bastard twins. Sometimes she found kindness. A woman gave her a wrapper. Another let her rest in her kiosk for an hour. But mostly, she faced stone eyes and harsh words. Nobody wanted to shelter a disgraced pregnant girl with no money, no husband, and no family. One day, after being chased from an empty veranda by the owner's dog, she wandered under the old village bridge and curled into herself, exhausted. It was there, under that cold, damp arch, her water broke. The pain came like waves of fire. She screamed, but the road was empty. She tried crawling, but the contractions dragged her down like an anchor. Her eyes rolled back. She thought she might die. But just as the world began to blur, she heard footsteps, then a voice, calm but urgent. "Madam, madam, are you okay?" It was Obinna, a local bricklayer returning from a job site with his wheelbarrow and shovel. He dropped everything and knelt beside her, removed his shirt, and wrapped it under her back. Without hesitation, he carried her in his arms like she weighed nothing and began shouting for help. When no one responded, he took her to his compound, a cramped room behind a mechanic shop, and with trembling hands and old rags, helped deliver the twins. There was no nurse, no sterile bed, just Obinna, his voice shaky but kind, telling her to push. 2 cries filled the room that night, Chisholm first, then Chitty. And with those cries, a new chapter began. Amaka fainted shortly after. When she awoke the next morning, weak and bloodied, she saw Obinna gently feeding one of the babies milk from a spoon. She blinked through tears. "Why? Why did you help me?" she asked in a hoarse whisper. He looked at her, eyes dark and kind. "Because someone needed to," he said. "Because I know what it's like to be abandoned." That was how Amaka, once loved by wealth and betrayed by pride, found salvation in the most unexpected place, in the arms of a man with no riches, no promises, just a heart willing to carry what others discarded. Obinna's one-room apartment was barely enough for one person, let alone a recovering mother and 2 crying newborns. The walls were stained with rainwater lines, the floor uneven, and the only window had no glass, just an old curtain tied with a rope. Yet it became Amaka's shelter, the first place in weeks that didn't echo shame. The mattress was thin, the ceiling leaked when it rained, but it was safe. And safe was a luxury Amaka hadn't known since the day she was kicked out. Obinna made space for her and the babies, sleeping most nights on the cold floor with a folded wrapper under his head. He cooked what little he had, mostly boiled yam or watery okra, and often gave her the larger portion, pretending he'd already eaten at the sight. Amaka watched him, confused. He asked for nothing, not even gratitude. At night, she heard him praying, not for wealth, but for strength to carry everyone under his roof. Days turned to weeks. Amaka's breasts were sore, her back ached, and the babies cried endlessly. But in that chaos, something quiet began to grow between her and Obinna. He was gentle, almost too gentle. He never touched her inappropriately or acted entitled to her body, even though gossip would later accuse them of living in sin. She told him about Chike one evening while folding baby wrappers on the floor. She told him everything, how he proposed under the mango tree, how he denied her pregnancy, how he mocked her in the market and chose another woman. Obinna didn't interrupt. He just listened. When she finished, he only said, "He may have left you, but he left something greater behind, these children. They're not curses. They're your crown." That was the first night Amaka cried in front of him. And that night, he quietly added a new prayer to his midnight whispers, not just for strength, but for peace in her heart. Despite the challenges, there were moments of light. Obinna made a handmade cradle from leftover wood and decorated it with beads and colored string. He nicknamed Chisholm Madam Stronghead because of her loud cry and feisty kicks, while Chitty was Mr. Quiet, always watching, barely fussing. They had nothing, but somehow it felt like everything. Amaka started sweeping yards for neighbors to earn $200 a day. Obinna worked construction from morning to dusk, returning with tired bones but a soft smile. Sometimes they sat outside in the evening, watching their baby sleep, and Amaka would catch herself smiling. Not because things were perfect, far from it, but because for the first time since her fall from grace, someone had seen her broken pieces and hadn't run. He had stayed. In a room where love wasn't declared, but shown daily through sacrifice, she began to heal. Amaka had started selling vegetables in the village market to support the little home she and Obinna were building. It wasn't much, small baskets of okra, oga leaves, and pepper, but it gave her purpose. She would strap the twins on her back, alternating between them throughout the day, while calling out to customers in a low, respectful voice. Though she kept her head down, the whispers never stopped. "That's the girl Chike disgraced," they'd murmur. "Now look at her, selling like her mother." Amaka endured it all in silence, focusing on feeding her children and keeping her mind strong. Obinna would stop by in the afternoon when returning from a site, handing her whatever coins he had earned, even if it was just 100. Their bond deepened, not with romantic words, but with sweat, struggle, and shared hunger. The market women eventually softened toward her, offering her better spots to sit, sharing unsold vegetables at day's end. But one afternoon, as the sun blazed and dust danced through the air, a shiny black SUV rolled into the market square, disturbing the peace with its blaring music. It was Chaik. He stepped out in polished shoes and designer sunglasses, holding hands with Adora, now heavily pregnant and wearing a gold lace gown. They walked through the market like royalty, shopping and sneering. Amaka tried to look away, but fate wouldn't let her. Chaik spotted her crouched beside her pepper basket, one twin strapped to her back and the other in a wrapper beside her leg. His laughter was loud, cold, and cruel. "A boy. Is that not Amaka?" he shouted to his friend. "Kai." So this is how the story ended. He walked closer and said, "So this is your destiny? From mango tree to market gutter. Where's your husband now? Abi na that bricklayer's still managing you." Adora joined in, eyeing Amaka from head to toe and scoffing. "Babe, leave her. She's clearly doing charity work now," she said with a fake pout. "Pity." Chaik chuckled, knelt mockingly beside the baby and said, "Maybe one day he'll grow up and thank me for not claiming him." Amaka didn't respond. Her eyes burned, but her face remained calm. She stood up slowly, dusted her wrapper, picked up her crying baby, and turned her back to them. The market women, who once gossiped now, stood in stunned silence. One of them, Mama Ifioma, walked over and placed a bitter cola in Amaka's hand. "Swallow it. For strength," she whispered. Amaka took it and walked away, her dignity in shreds, but her will intact. That night, she sat in Obinna's room and cried in silence while he boiled yam. When he saw her tears, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "One day, they will laugh and see you on TV. Don't lose heart." Rain pounded the zinc roof like fists of rage that night. Obinna had returned from the site drenched, his torn sandals hanging by one strap, his shirt soaked through. Yet, the moment he stepped into their room and saw Amaka shaking and feeding the twins with watery pap, he smiled. He always smiled, not because things were easy, but because he knew if he didn't, she would crumble. That week, he had been laid off from a construction site because the foreman's cousin needed work. There was no warning, no severance, just a pat on the back and a cruel, "You go manage." They had only 300 left between them. The babies were crying more often now. Chisholm had a fever. Amaka's breasts had dried up from stress and poor diet. Still, Obinna said nothing of his layoff for 3 days. He couldn't bring himself to see the look of worry on her face again. Eventually, she found out. She caught him selling his old bicycle frame to a scrap collector for $150. That night, she confronted him. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, voice low. He sat on the floor, folding wrappers for the twins, and said, "Because I'm supposed to be the man. And what kind of man can't provide food for a woman and children that aren't even his?" Amaka was stunned, not by the situation, but by how gently he carried that shame. She walked over, knelt beside him, and said, "These children are yours. Not by blood, but by everything that matters." They held each other that night without speaking. Not in romance, but in solidarity. Two wounded souls clinging to the only light they had, each other. The following week, they picked firewood together and sold it in the market for $500 a bundle. Amaka resumed selling vegetables, and Obinna started offering to carry loads for traders just to earn small money. Their clothes were faded, their shoes barely soles anymore, but their eyes never stopped looking forward. One evening, Amaka returned to the room and found Obinna drawing something on cardboard with chalk. It was a rough sketch of a school building. "If I ever get money," he said shyly, "I want to build schools for children like ours." Amaka stood beside him, tears in her eyes, and replied, "Then we will build it. Not one day, soon." That night, she whispered to her twins as they slept, "You will never beg like I begged. You will never cry like I cried. I swear it on my blood." She didn't know how, but she believed it, and belief for the first time, felt like a seed. The proposal didn't come with roses, a kneeling pose, or an audience. It came during the harshest harmattan evening, when the twins were crying from fever, and the last 300 had just been spent on paracetamol syrup. Obinna had returned from a long day, his hands dry and calloused from mixing cement, his eyes bloodshot with fatigue. Amaka was squatting beside the charcoal pot outside, fanning the fire with a piece of cardboard, trying to boil plain water just to keep their bodies warm. She didn't see him coming until he gently placed a small packet of akpa beside her. "I managed to get this," he said softly. She looked up, eyes glossy. Before she could thank him, he continued, "Amaka, I know I don't have anything. No car, no fine clothes, no father to call chief. But I have this room, these hands, and this heart. And all of them are already yours. But I want to make it official." Amaka blinked. The fire crackled between them. She didn't speak immediately. She just stared at the man who had caught her from the cliff edge of death, lifted her through shame, and carried her pain without complaint. He had never kissed her, never touched her body in lust. Yet he had bathed the twins when she was too weak to stand, fetched water at midnight when the queue was long, and given her back her dignity without demanding a price. "You're not proposing to me because of pity, right?" she asked cautiously. Obinna shook his head. "Pity doesn't last this long, Amaka. I stayed because you and those kids are my future. I know I'm poor, but I believe we can build something better from this nothing." Amaka's tears fell freely then. Not the kind of tears that sting from pain, but the kind that come when your soul recognizes safety. She nodded slowly, whispering, "Yes, I'm yours." There was no applause, just the twins' soft cries and the wind brushing against rusted zinc. But in that moment, it felt like heaven had finally knelt in their direction. Word spread quickly through the compound. Some neighbors mocked it. "Proposal inside, face me I face you? Navao." But others smiled quietly. Mama F gave them her late husband's kettle as a gift. Baba Ifioma offered his old bench for their doorway. No pastor was involved. No ring was bought. But Obinna carved her a wooden bangle from scrap wood and etched her name inside it with a razor blade. Amaka wore it like a crown. They didn't even set a date. There was no wedding, just a union sealed by grit, gratitude, and a shared promise never to abandon each other. Amaka would later tell her children that the day she said yes to Obinna wasn't the day she became a wife. It was the day she began to truly live. The transformation began slowly, not with a sudden inheritance or a miracle, but with tiny cracks of breakthrough in the wall of hardship. After their quiet engagement, Amaka began teaching part-time at the Community Learning Center for Children. The pay was small, barely enough to buy a loaf of bread and milk for the twins, but it was the first time in years she was being called Madam by anyone other than sarcasm. She would strap Chisholm on her back and carry Chitty in a sling while helping children write their names, pronounce vowels, and understand numbers. Word spread fast about the madam who teaches with her babies. Some parents were moved and began contributing old notebooks, pencils, even sachets of Milo for her own kids. It wasn't much, but it was dignity. Amaka now stood before chalkboards, not judgmental eyes. Meanwhile, Obinna started taking extra building jobs. He would plaster walls in the morning, dig soak-away pits in the afternoon, and help mix concrete for site supervisors at night. One day, a retired teacher whose wall he repaired said, "You're too intelligent to just be lifting blocks. Do you have a drawing book?" That single comment planted a seed. Obinna began sketching again at night, crude floor plans, little room layouts, ideas for better low-income housing. He'd show them to Amaka, who would quietly nod, even though she didn't always understand what the lines meant. "We'll build a company one day," he'd say. "A small one. Obinna and Sons." Amaka would laugh. "What about daughters?" And he'd smile. "Them too." At night, they told their dreams in whispers so the twins could sleep. One room held 4 people, 1 kerosene lamp, and a future shaped by love, not luck. The twins, Chisholm and Chitty, began to walk, and soon after, they began to talk. Their first words weren't mummy or daddy, but book and broom. They grew up around chalk, wrappers, cement powder, and voices that constantly spoke hope. By age 4, Chisholm was already reading alphabets faster than some of Amaka's students. Chitty could calculate change better than the market boys. One day, Amaka brought them to the learning center, and the supervisor said, "These ones are different. Train them well. The world will clap for them." Amaka held those words like currency. They didn't have shoes. Their shorts were patched. But they had something rare, a home where love was loud, faith was stubborn, and no one reminded you of your past unless it was to show how far you've come. When the scholarship competition was announced, Amaka didn't plan to register her children. She had seen posters like that before, promising rewards for the best young minds, only to end in disappointment and corruption. But the local head teacher insisted. Let them try. Chisholm especially. She's not normal. She's gifted. With 500 borrowed from Mama F, Amaka filled the forms and stapled a recent photo. Chisholm, now 9, stood nervously outside the hall with her brother, while children from all over the LGA arrived. Some in uniforms, others in matching socks and polished shoes. Chisholm wore a faded yellow gown and oversized sandals. Chitty offered her a sweet and said, "Go and win for both of us." That single gesture lit something in her eyes. She walked into the hall, head held high. When the test began, she wrote like her fingers knew secrets. English, mathematics, logic, essay. By the time she finished, even the invigilators were whispering, "Who trained this one?" 2 weeks later, the results came. The top prize, a $1 million scholarship to the best secondary school in the state, went to Chisholm Obinna. When the announcement was made, the entire learning center erupted in cheers. Reporters came. Photos were taken. Chisholm, in her rubber slippers, stood on a podium and received the prize with trembling hands. When asked, "Who is your father?" she pointed at Obinna in the crowd. "That's my daddy," she said proudly. A reporter asked, "What's your secret?" She replied, "My mummy teaches me everything, and my daddy tells me I can do anything." That moment, captured on camera, went viral. Facebook posts, WhatsApp broadcasts, local news features. The girl who once slept under a bridge had birthed a genius. Amaka stood in the background, arms folded, heart pounding. For the first time in her life, her name wasn't being whispered in shame, it was being spoken with awe. The governor's wife invited Chisholm for a visit. NGOs offered more support. Amaka was gifted a sewing machine, which she gave to another struggling mother because she didn't sew. "I have my hands full with books," she said with a smile. Obinna received calls from contractors asking if he could handle small school renovation jobs. His sketches, which he had shown to the scholarship coordinator during the award, had impressed them. From the same hands that once carried cement for $800 a day, opportunities were now falling like rain. Yet, they didn't move to a new house. They stayed in the one-room apartment. "Let's grow quietly," Obinna said. But in that quiet, the winds of transformation were already stirring. And somewhere in the city, Chike saw the viral photo, his eyes frozen, his breath short, as he recognized the child he once denied standing proudly beside the man he once mocked. The wedding hall buzzed with extravagance. It was a kind of event where every decoration screamed money, and every attendee came to see who wore what, not who was getting married. Chike and his wife Edora were seated at the high table, adorned in gold lace and agbada like royalty. He had just secured a political contract that fattened his bank account, and his swagger was back, or so he thought. The compound echoed with the sound of plates, high heels, and Instagram story updates. That was the day Amaka arrived, not to attend, but to deliver some donated books for the children's outreach that happened to be hosted at the community center next door. She wore a modest gown, her twins beside her in clean uniforms and hand-me-down shoes, their posture straight and proud. She had no intention of entering the party, but one of the organizers spotted her and rushed over. "You're Chisholm's mother, right?" the woman asked with urgency. "The governor's wife just mentioned her. Please come in. They want to recognize her." Amaka hesitated, but the woman insisted. And that was how she walked into the wedding hall, unaware that the universe had written a scene that would shift destinies. As she entered, heads turned. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't loud, but her presence was magnetic, not because of money, but because of story. The MC paused and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the mother of the scholarship child who made our state proud is here." Applause erupted. Chike, mid-sip of wine, choked slightly. He turned and saw her walking in, poised, glowing. The twins flanking her like twin torches of glory. The same girl he once called a disgrace was now being celebrated. Adora looked confused. "Isn't that?" she whispered. But Chike didn't answer. He couldn't. His mouth was suddenly dry. They invited Amaka to the stage. She didn't boast. She simply said, "Thank you. My daughter is a gift. We've come a long way, and I give God the glory." That humility cut deeper than any insult. Adora's smile faded as whispers spread among the crowd. Some recalled the market incident. Some remembered the bride price visit years ago. It all came flooding back. A man beside Chike muttered, "That woman's husband must be proud." Chike flinched. Then the final blow landed. Chisholm was invited to speak. She stepped up, spoke eloquently about dreams, education, and gratitude. Then she said, "And I dedicate this moment to my daddy, not the one who left, but the one who stayed." She pointed to Obinna, who stood humbly at the back, his hands clasped, not wanting to steal attention. The entire room erupted in applause again. Chike remained seated, his lips pressed tight, the glass in his hand suddenly feeling like a stone. That was the day mockery turned bitter. It was the day he stopped laughing. It started with a phone call Obinna almost ignored. "Good afternoon. Is this Mr. Obinna, the builder who showed church hall designs at the scholarship event?" The man on the other end introduced himself as the chairman of a small private school trying to expand. "We saw your sketch. We liked your ideas. Can you handle a basic classroom project?" Obinna's hands shook as he replied, "Yes, sir, I can." That week, he traveled to inspect the land, came back, and sat with Amaka at night sketching measurements on old cardboard. He borrowed a friend's builder license and registered a name, Obinna and Family Contractors. The project was modest, 2 classrooms, a staff toilet, and a simple fence. But it paid $450,000 in total. When the payment landed, Obinna stared at the credit alert for 5 minutes before handing the phone to Amaka. "See, God remembered us," he whispered. They didn't waste it. Obinna bought cement in bulk, and Amaka got the twins their first proper shoes. But most importantly, they bought a small piece of land, 60 by 60, on the edge of the village. It wasn't prime land. The access road was rough, and the neighbors were mostly farmers. But it was theirs. Their first visit to the land was emotional. Obinna walked the perimeter slowly, pointing with pride. "Here will be our house. 3 bedrooms. Small veranda. A garden at the back. Maybe a borehole too." Amaka smiled. "You forgot a reading room for Chisholm and Chitty." They laughed not because everything was perfect, but because the future no longer looked like a storm cloud. It looked like a sunrise. That day, they knelt on the sand and prayed. Not for riches, but for peace. For continuity. For protection against the past ever returning to destroy what they were now building. Construction began weeks later, slowly but steadily. Obinna insisted on doing most of the work himself. "Let my sweat soak these blocks," he said. Amaka cooked for the workers and managed accounts. The twins fetched water, carried nails, and wrote affirmations on the wall. "This house is built by love." As the walls rose, so did their spirits. People came to look, curious. Some offered unsolicited opinions. Why not paint it yellow? Why not use marble? But Amaka just smiled. They weren't building to impress. They were building to be free. One afternoon, Chike drove past and slowed down as he saw Obinna plastering the wall in a faded shirt. He smirked, shook his head, and muttered, "Block carrier turned landlord. Wonders shall never end." But what he didn't realize was this: every bucket of sand Obinna lifted, every beam he raised, every plank he nailed, was the burial of the mockery he once laughed with. It was no longer about revenge. It was about redemption. And they were writing theirs in cement. The signs began subtly: delayed payments, closed meetings, unanswered calls. Chaik, once the golden boy of local politics and real estate, began to feel the shifting wind. His contract with the local government was under audit, and some discrepancies had surfaced. "Don't worry," he told Adora. "Just opposition noise." But behind closed doors, things were falling apart. His former business partner, Uche, had been secretly submitting inflated invoices under Chaik's name, siphoning funds. When the EFCC began sniffing, Uche vanished, and all the documents pointed to Chaik. Within weeks, his accounts were frozen. His vehicles were seized. His staff abandoned him, and Adora, always the type to pack her bags at the smell of poverty, moved out and returned to her father's mansion in Abuja. "I didn't sign up for disgrace," she spat, leaving with their 1-year-old daughter and a suitcase of designer clothes. Chaik's descent was not quiet. It was loud, televised, and brutal. Social media dug up everything: his lavish parties, his old interviews about hard work, even the market video where he mocked Amaka. Comments flooded in. "See life. Navai, karma no dei where sleepers." For the first time in years, Chaik walked into the same bank he once swaggered through, not as a VIP, but to beg for a loan. The security man didn't recognize him. The manager wouldn't even come out to speak. One afternoon, he stood outside the real estate office he once owned, now bearing a new name under bank foreclosure, and wept. No driver, no assistant, no ego left. Just a man in a crumpled shirt and cracked phone, trying to call people who no longer picked. He tried to sell the last land his father gave him, but legal claims and debt collectors blocked him at every turn. In a desperate move, Chaik returned to the village, not with a convoy, but in a shared bus. He walked through the same market he once paraded with laughter, now with his cap pulled low, hoping no one would recognize him. But they did. One trader muttered, "Is that not?" Another hissed, "He no even carry motor again." The whispers chased him like shadows. But the final nail came when he walked past Amaka's newly plastered house and saw a banner that read, "Obinna and Family Contractors, building dreams with integrity." He froze. The gate was open. Chisholm School award hung proudly near the entrance. Chaik's knees buckled. Not because he was jealous, but because he now understood what he had lost, not just a woman, but a future he traded for pride. His empire had fallen. His name was now poison. And the only people who once truly loved him no longer needed him. Chaik hadn't planned to stop. He had boarded a local bus from town with his face hidden under a baseball cap, hoping to make his way quietly to an old friend's house in the village who might lend him money. But fate had other ideas. As the rusty bus crawled past the town roundabout, something caught his eye, a large billboard mounted right beside the new secondary school. It wasn't just the size that shocked him, it was the faces. Bold and bright, the banner read, "State Academic Ambassadors, Chisholm and Chidi Obinna, Children of the Year." Below, it was a smiling image of the twins, wearing matching uniforms and holding achievement plaques. And right beside them, standing proudly, was Amaka, no longer the barefoot girl from the past, but a woman in an elegant wrapper and calm dignity. Chaik froze. His mouth went dry. His fingers trembled. The driver had to nudge him to keep moving. But in that moment, the weight of his past came crashing down. The bus continued down the road, but Chaik was no longer present. All he could see was that image burned into his mind. His children, his blood, the same twins he had once spat on, laughed at, called bastards. Now they were state ambassadors, and the world was celebrating them. He remembered the way he had mocked Amaka at the market, the cruel laughter, the way he had thrown 200 at her feet like she was dirt. He remembered Adora laughing beside him, telling him to forget those charity cases. And now that same girl had raised 2 stars without a kobo from him. The man who took her in, the one he called a bush bricklayer, had given those children everything he, Chaik, never did. It wasn't just shocking, it was unbearable. As the bus passed by the new estate under construction, one being handled by Obinna and Family Contractors, Chaik realized he hadn't just lost a woman. He had lost a dynasty. That night, he didn't sleep. He wandered the village like a ghost, his thoughts loud enough to drown his hunger. The pride he once wore like a royal garment had become a chain. He remembered his father's words, never mix with the poor. They'll drag you down. But Amaka, the girl from the mud walls and cracked heels, had risen without him. And Obinna, the man he once called construction labor, was now the one being invited to churches and schools for projects. Meanwhile, Chaik had no job, no car, no wife, no friends, and no name that opened doors anymore. He stared at his reflection in a dirty shop window and barely recognized himself. His shirt was torn at the sleeve, his once golden wristwatch now faded. All he had left was shame, thick, bitter, choking shame. And buried beneath it was the growing ache of something unfamiliar, regret. It took Chaik 3 more days to gather the courage. Each morning, he stood across the road from Amaka and Obinna's new home, watching as neighbors greeted them warmly. He saw Amaka walk the twins to school, her steps confident, her face peaceful. He saw Obinna drive off in a small second-hand Toyota, not flashy, but dignified. Everything about them screamed fulfillment. Chaik would stand behind a tree, watching with envy, dread, and longing. Finally, on the 4th day, hunger and desperation pushed him past his shame. He crossed the road and walked through the open gate. The compound was clean, well swept, with flower pots in the corner and children's sandals arranged beside the front steps. It didn't look like luxury. It looked like peace. And for the first time in years, he realized how rare peace truly was. Obinna opened the door and paused. For a moment, he didn't say anything. His eyes scanned Chaik from head to toe, torn trousers, dusty feet, an old shirt with oil stains, and a smell that came from days without bathing. Chaik, he said, not with anger, not with mockery, just calm surprise. Chaik tried to speak, but his throat tightened. Amaka emerged behind Obinna, holding a tray of pap and akra. The moment her eyes met Chaik's, the tray nearly slipped from her hands. Silence hung thick between them, as all three stared at the ghost of a man who once believed he was above them. Finally, Chaik dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry," he whispered, barely audible. "I came to see my children." Amaka didn't move. Obinna stepped forward and gently took the tray from her. "You'll have to sit outside," he said softly. "Our children don't know you, and I won't let them meet a stranger in this state." Chaik nodded, ashamed. He sat on the bench outside while Obinna brought him water and leftover rice. Amaka stayed inside, heart pounding. She wasn't angry, not anymore. She had healed. But seeing him like that, so reduced, stirred something deep and sad within her. Still, she remembered the girl who once cried under the rain, the one who was called a disgrace, and left to deliver twins alone. She wasn't that girl anymore. And he had no right to return just because life had humbled him. Chaik ate in silence. When he was done, he stood and said, "Please tell them. I'm their father." Obinna shook his head slowly. "You were," he said, "but I am." Chaik looked away, eyes burning. He nodded, muttered, "Thank you," and walked out slowly, the weight of reality pressing down on his back like a cross. For once, no one mocked him. The silence alone was punishment enough. The media wanted a story. When news of the scholarship twins and their inspirational background hit regional headlines, journalists flooded the small village for interviews. One morning, a popular TV station arrived to film a documentary on rising from ashes, the Obinna family. Amaka wore a simple dress, her face fresh with natural beauty. Obinna stood beside her, protective but humble. The twins, now in crisp school uniforms, spoke with confidence beyond their years. The cameras loved them. The viewers adored them. At one point, the host asked Chisholm, "What does your father mean to you?" Chisholm beamed, "He's my hero. He carried us when nobody else did." She turned to Obinna and added, "Even when I was sick and we had nothing, he never let us feel unloved." The room applauded. The host smiled and said, "What a blessing to have such a father." But outside the window, hidden behind the gate, Chaik stood watching, tears silently running down his dusty face. He hadn't come to cause a scene. He didn't even want to speak. He had only come to see them, the children he once abandoned. He watched Chitty laughing with the host, sharing his dream of becoming an engineer, so he could build big bridges and fix broken roads like my daddy. The irony stung like acid. That title, Daddy, used to belong to him. Now it was owned by the man he once mocked as a wheelbarrow pusher. He remembered when Amaka had cried and begged him to believe her. He remembered the cruel laughter at the market. He remembered how he had called her a liar, a gold digger, a disgrace. But now no one was disgraced except him. He sat on a stone outside their gate and cried the way a man cries when he knows nothing will ever be the same again. Not out of jealousy, but out of gut-wrenching regret. When the filming ended, Amaka stepped outside and saw him. She didn't panic. She walked over slowly, with a calm that could only come from surviving fire. "What do you want, Chike?" she asked gently. He didn't look up. "To say sorry," he whispered. "To ask if they can know me, even just a little." Amaka sighed. "You didn't just abandon them," she said. "You abandoned the version of them that needed you most. Now they don't." Her words weren't meant to hurt. They were just true. Chike nodded slowly. "I understand," he said, rising to his feet. "Tell them. I'm proud of them." Amaka didn't respond. She watched him walk away, his shoulders heavy with loss. As he turned the corner, a motorcycle splashed water on him and didn't stop. He didn't even react. That was the day he finally accepted it. He wasn't the villain anymore. He was just irrelevant. The village square was packed that Sunday. Chairs lined up under canopies, drums thumping from one corner, and elders seated in rows with wrappers folded around their waists. It wasn't just a gathering. It was a celebration. The twins, Chisholm and Chitty, were being honored by the local council for their academic achievements. Youths danced, school children sang, and banners with their names flapped in the breeze. Amaka sat on the front row in a clean lace gown gifted by the Women's Cooperative, her head tied in a golden scarf. Obinna sat beside her in a crisp native attire, holding a carved walking stick not out of need, but as a quiet symbol of how far he had come. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew this day wasn't just about the children. It was about reclaiming dignity that had once been stripped from them. After the awards were given, the microphone was passed to Amaka. At first, she hesitated. The same ground she stood on had once hosted her disgrace, the day Chike mocked her in front of half the village. But now the villagers waited, not with judgment, but with curiosity and respect. She stepped forward, took the mic, and cleared her throat. "My name is Amaka," she began, "and years ago I walked through this village pregnant, barefoot, and ashamed." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Some heads lowered. She continued, "The man responsible denied me. His family insulted mine. I was chased out. I gave birth under a bridge. And this same village watched it all." A hush fell. Amaka wasn't crying. Her voice was steady, strong. "But one man with no car, no title, and no wealth helped me. Not because he had to, but because he chose to." She turned to Obinna, who looked away briefly, tears already gathering. "Obinna is the reason my children are standing here today. He didn't father them with blood, but he fathered them with sacrifice, with sleepless nights, with empty pockets, and with love." The crowd erupted in applause. Some elders stood. Mama F wept openly. Then something unexpected happened. Chief Nwankwo, Chike's father, stood slowly from the back row and walked forward. With a cracked voice and trembling hands, he took the mic. "I once told my son never to mix with the poor," he said. "But today I see. The poor raised royalty, and the rich raised regret." His voice broke. "I failed, and I'm sorry." But Chike was nowhere in sight. He couldn't bear to attend. Because he knew what was coming, not just truth, but a truth told so loudly, so honorably, that even time had to bow. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when Chike, now reduced to a dispatch rider, stood at the roadside waiting for his next delivery. The bike he was using wasn't his. He borrowed it from a friend and paid commission per delivery. His once fair skin was now tanned from sun exposure, his lips dry, his beard patchy. Every day was survival. He no longer chased contracts or attended gala nights. Now he chased time, fuel money, and destinations. That day, he was standing outside the plaza gate when a modest black SUV rolled past. Something about it made him look up. In the back seat, two teenagers, a girl and a boy, laughed with headphones around their necks. In the front, a man with a familiar calm smile drove. And beside him, a woman rested her head lightly on his shoulder, laughing at something he said. It was them. Amaka Obinna, Chisholm, and Chitty. They didn't see him. Or maybe they did. But chose not to stop. And honestly, Chike didn't blame them. He stood there, watching the car disappear into the distance, like a life he once touched but never held. That image burned into him, not because of what they had materially, but because of what they had emotionally. Joy, peace, wholeness, things money couldn't buy and pride couldn't restore. Chike sat on the dusty bench near the suya cellar and buried his face in his hands. He thought about the years he wasted, chasing Adaora's father's approval, mocking Obinna's struggles, laughing at Amaka's pain. And in the end, what did it all give him? Regret, silence, loneliness, no wife, no child, no name worth remembering. Meanwhile, in the car, Obinna reached for Amaka's hand and gave it a light squeeze. She smiled, glancing at the twins in the back seat. "Do you ever think of the past?" she asked. Obinna shrugged. "Sometimes. But not with pain anymore. Only with gratitude." Amaka nodded. "We made it." Chisholm tapped her shoulder from the back. "Mummy, the governor's wife said she wants to meet you personally this time. She said you're inspiring." Amaka smiled. "Tell her I'll come. After I finish washing your uniforms." The whole car laughed. They weren't rich, not yet. But they were fulfilled, loved, complete. And somewhere behind them, far back on the roadside of a life he once chose, Chike remained frozen, watching the family he once spat on now ride quietly into the future. Not with revenge, but with peace. The kind of peace that only poetic justice can write. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Touching Podcast for more.